Wired Differently, Leveraging Your Favors on Fulcrum Principles, written by Todd Saylor, narrated by Russell Newton.
The Indiana summer sun shines hot, and I'm running. My best friend Randy and I sprint through a golf course, weaving past water traps, across putting greens and fairways, ignoring shouts that would get off the course. Randy and I race at full speed. The finish line is my home. What prize is worth such efforts to us 10-year-old boys? Well, the winner gets bragging rights until the next race, of course. At the edge of the golf course, I leap over the ditch and dart onto the county road. My sneakers blur over the asphalt when I hear the squeal of a tire. I look to my right to see the grill of a Chevy coupe as it roars over the top of the hill towards me, ready to smash my young bones into the pavement. Instantly, I lock eyes with the driver, and his face blanches with horror. Without thinking, I jump straight up. The front of the car passes underneath me. I glance off the hood, tumble to the ground, and land on my feet, miraculously unhurt. The car screeches to a halt. Skid marks stretch all the way to the top of the hill, and I smell burnt rubber. The driver, a man my dad's age, bolts out of the car. His initial expression of shock has vanished, replaced by a hard, condemning glare. I could have stayed and reassured him that I was all right. I should have apologized profusely for needlessly scaring him. I should have taken a moment to reflect that luck had saved me from being smeared into the road. But because I'm wired differently, I don't. After all, I have something more important to do. I have a race to win. I have to beat Randy. I managed to blurt out, "I'm sorry," and take off. Thank you for reading my book, Wired Differently. I hope you enjoy it, and I wish you all the very best. This is Todd Saylor. Thank you.
Fast forward almost 30 years, I'd reached a time in my life where I should have been basking in my hard-won successes, both professionally, personally, and spiritually. Instead, as a man who was truly wired differently, I realized I had succumbed to the drift. It was to be one of the most important moments in my life. What is the drift? The drift is what happens when you slowly and unknowingly lose your way, slipping away from the beliefs and disciplines that you once established as your guiding light. It happens to us all. But this is what I know. People who are willing to look for this drift, face it head on, and do the work necessary to recalibrate are those of us who are truly wired differently. People experience the drift in many forms and in many walks of life. In work, in relationships, in marriage, in partnerships, in our habits, our work ethics, our language and beliefs, even as a challenge to our core principles. Those small compromises that make things a little easier at any given moment and seem inconsequential at the time can lead to a death of 1,000 cuts. One small cut may not be a problem. We tell ourselves we can handle one small cut, no problem. Over time, however, these small cuts add up, and if they do, the remedy may be impossible to find. My recognition of the drift came abruptly. The time, July 2002. I was 38. The setting, our local church. Spotlights beamed bright up on the stage, making the Indiana summer even hotter. I looked over the church crowd. Today's count was well over 500. Our pastor had asked me to approach the podium this particular Sunday morning, and I was excited to share my thoughts on the difference between the act of just telling the truth and Jesus Christ as the truth. I began by discussing accrual truth, meaning the factual truth as it happened, and how we're to be truthful people. I segued into a story about one of my favorite heroes, citing George Washington and the cherry tree, and an anecdote about telling the truth at whatever the cost. I looked out at my audience and felt confident about my presentation. I could see that people were clearly engaged. Public speaking is something I truly enjoy, and I could tell by the expressions on the faces of the audience that I was doing my job. The message, the tone, the rhythm felt good. My confidence was strong. During the final third of my speech, however, I veered from my original script and began talking about the sin of not telling the whole truth. That omission of facts from the truth was as much of a lie as the falsehood of an actual lie. But this time, something in me became disrupted, as if the message was proceeding on 2 tracks, one to the audience, and a second into the depths of my heart and soul. Was this divergence suggesting that I was guilty of some omission of fact, some bending of the rules by skirting what I knew, at least subconsciously, to be true? As sweat beaded on my forehead, I concluded that I was indeed hearing a new message, one directly related to the drift. This internal message, bearing down like a fist, was forcing me to confront an omission of truth in a recent development in my business life. I heard a voice saying, "You've drifted from your core values. You're jeopardizing the principles that have served you so well in the past." Even as I was being bombarded by this internal dialogue, I heard another voice laying out a plan of action that could reverse the drift. The two messages spooled from me on separate yet synchronous tracks that ended at the same time on a note of victory, recognition, reconciliation, and yes, the truth. For I had drifted, not knowing or feeling the slow, creeping shift of my surroundings or how my success had affected my internal compass. This was a seminal moment. I was very nearly lost at sea, both professionally and personally, but not quite. The drift is not irreversible. It never is. Here I was, staring at an uncomfortable truth about myself that, despite my good intentions and principled values, I had allowed myself to drift. I was saying one thing while doing the opposite. I'd allowed myself to spout not complete truths through business practices for perceived gains. I realized I'd been committing convenient facts of non-completion, or a subconscious lie suggesting that what I was doing was for the greater good. Such an unacceptable rationalization. Ironically, my pastor had chosen me to speak in front of our congregation that fateful morning because I projected positivity in my business practices, in my faith, and in my personal life. I was, in his eyes, an example of what happens when you dig in and work hard and live your life accordingly. At that time of my life, my wife, Tracy, was, and has always been, an absolutely spectacular, beautiful person and an amazing partner. We had 3 fun and ever-challenging daughters, Courtney, 12, Kendra, 11, and Kara, 3. I had much to be thankful for, and still do. In my professional life, I'd been recently promoted to the National Sales Director of a publicly traded entity out of Phoenix, Arizona. The situation had paid off spectacularly for both the company and me. I was given every sales award there was to be had, and the heftiest bonuses the company had ever bestowed. Instead of counting my blessings, however, I was more focused on my drift. My doubts about the publicly traded company's product and some of my own sales practices on their behalf loomed large and bore down upon my conscience. What troubled me at the time was learning that the company's executives were not being forthright with our clients or with me. Here's the way it worked. We were a professional employee organization. As a PEO, we would hire the entire workforce from an employer and then lease those workers back in a business strategy called employee leasing. This allows companies to focus on their core strengths, while the PEO leveraged the accumulated totals from several businesses into one federal ID number to negotiate better deals for health insurance and other benefits such as workers' comp. Basically, we assume the employer's administrative liabilities and payroll and tax headaches. Sounds good, right? While this was an amazing training ground for me in many ways, I also began to sense a deep conflict regarding the PEO's adverse risk selection process. What happened was that I learned that the company executives had been under-reserving the claims, which drove the stock's value upward to improve company gains. Although not illegal, it most likely fostered a problem with consequences we didn't want. Not explaining the truth about the risks was an omission of fact of great proportion. The stock had split 3 times in 18 months based upon this strategy. I was selling at unprecedented levels and pocketing substantial personal commissions. During my tenure, the company had grown from $50 million to $1 billion, becoming the biggest PEO in the country. I was generating more than $600,000 annually. This is not to boast, but a means of illustrating how blinders and the fog of what we choose to consider truth can be all too convenient, in particular when you elect not to self-examine what you're doing. That was my drift. Yours may be something completely different, but a drift is a drift. It's how we respond to it that is most important. We turn away from the truth by not allowing ourselves to see real truths, and our first step in rectifying this situation is recognizing its potential disastrous consequences. Now, as I stood in front of the congregation on that all-important day, I no longer saw myself as a man worthy of delivering our pastor's messages of the day, but rather as someone facing his drift. Inevitably, the drift is impacted by the 3 Ps: pride, power, and plenty. Here I was, a man ready to admit how the 3 Ps had shaken my world and how eager I was to face the truth and act upon it. The minute I returned home that day, I sat down with Tracy and told her of my decision to step away from the current church leadership and from my business career, mindful of the latter's impact on our personal finances. What had become far more important was correcting the drift that had so negatively impacted my life's path. I'm going to resign from the PEO and the church's leadership, I told her. They've drifted away from their core principles, and so have I. Amazingly, Tracy didn't bat an eye. She looked at me with love and compassion and said, "I agree, and I'm proud of you." Wow, I thought, how cool of her. But this was Tracy. She and I have been together since we were 17. She knows me and is so intuitive. She's always been there for me, even in the worst of possible times, truly a favor of biblical proportions to me. I'm relieved. I've been feeling the strain too. Time for a change, she said in her trusting and confident way. Okay, now what? We build our own payroll service company, and we do it the right way, with transparent pricing and the cleanest possible business delivery and development. We focus on the client 100%. We concentrate on serving our clients, not ourselves or our stockbroker's bottom line. Jump ahead 17 years. Our HCM is a multi-million-dollar business and continues to grow and evolve as a cloud-based industry leader in this field. This new venture has allowed me many opportunities to discuss my current approach to business and spirituality through a multitude of venues, radio, social media, and as a public speaker. In my personal life, I've enjoyed more advancements than I ever thought possible. My relationships with Tracy, our daughters, and our families are stronger than ever. The evolution in my life often leads to this question: Todd, how did you do it? The answer's simple. All I've done is stay afloat in uncertain times, execute well-thought-out plans, never quit advancing, going from red light to red light with positivity, and actualizing my dreams through action. I believe in the good in others and acknowledge my own drift when it happens and correct it without hesitation. I know one thing: advancement comes from realizing that you're wired differently. Such a realization may make us more susceptible to the drift, but I think it also makes it easier to acknowledge when it happens and to correct it without hesitation. Whether it's the weight you've gained over the years or the lack of marketing you're putting into your company, we're all susceptible to the drift. It happens in our personal lives, our professional lives, and in our spiritual lives. When you drift, you become a slave to the status quo, what I call the land of quo. Suffice to say, any time we're stuck in the land of quo, we're not realizing our potential. To move forward, we need to see the truth. We need to make goals that allow us to pursue the truth. We also need to know our strengths, what I call our favors. Land of quo. Favor? What do these mean? Let's find out. From here, we'll be discussing terms unique to my approach of not settling for being average. To help us along the way, I've created the following Wired Differently glossary. Favor. Any personal gift, a talent, a resource you might have developed, an experience affecting you, either good or bad. It's an idea, a motivation, or an emotional state that you can realize and use to survive, reach out, and advance. This is a powerful concept that's crucial to understanding this book and philosophy. Obviously, access to money is an advantage. So is having people who can mentor you through a process. Please, don't fail to recognize that your reactions to a setback or bad environments are sometimes your biggest favors. Such a reaction could motivate you to no longer accept the status quo and take action to change your situation in life. Within this broader definition of favor, we have what I call a favor forward, a confronted weakness. You can never rise above the level of your greatest weakness, so why not make the recognition of your weakness a favor? Inventory. Taking stock of what favors you have and how they can be used to get what and where you want. Imagine that you're stranded on a desert island. Wouldn't you inventory what resources you have available, such as fresh water, food, and shipwrecked items? If your goal was to get off the island, wouldn't you look for tools and materials to build a raft or boat? Likewise, in life, you need to see the favors you have available. Land of quo. Another term for the status quo, but a bigger version of your surroundings and where you exist. Often, we exist as a mere drone in this land of quo, where we accept the boundaries and limitations given to us, and we end up not seeing the forest for the trees. Fulcrum. A principle, a fundamental requisite premise, a process, the base or foundation on which you pivot, hoist, or lever a favor. It's the foundation and tipping point of action. For example, the mind is the fulcrum upon which you leverage your favor of work ethic. You concentrate actions to turn on that fulcrum of mind. Leverage is the recognition and effort behind the favors that you apply against a fulcrum. That effort could be gathering business associates to assemble a better deal that would win over your prospects. Another example of effort would be taking night classes to expand your knowledge of a necessary subject. Leadership palette. Those leadership skills you need to leverage your favors. These skills include communication, decisiveness, creativity, motivating, delegating, and other areas of leadership gifts. If you're an entrepreneur, a business person, or just someone who's stuck in life and afraid to make a move, let's explore your uniqueness. Let's explore your favors and leverage them on fulcrums proven to facilitate advancement and correct for the drift. Here's a simple question for you. Do you want to be average? If you're wired differently and proud of it, your answer is no. And if your answer is no, then let's take this journey together. This has been Wired Differently, Leveraging Your Favors on Fulcrum Principles, written by Todd Saylor, narrated by Russell Newton. Copyright 2019 by Todd Saylor. Production copyright by Todd Saylor.